Who is Maajid Nawaz?
He's a former Islamist. He's a former radical. He wasn't a terrorist, actually, but he was, just a hair's breadth away from being one. He was part of an organization called Hizb ut-Tahrir, which actually did more than perhaps any group in recent memory to popularize the notion of a global caliphate, which we now see horribly exercised by the Islamic State. So they were, it was a dangerous organization, and he was talking to higher-ups in Pakistan and recruiting for it. And he was also doing the same in Egypt, and he wound up in prison for 5 years in Egypt for his activities, but got de-radicalized in prison, just living in proximity with jihadists and Islamists and understanding more about the kind of world they wanted to build and the horrible implications of that. His faith in the cause just eventually unwound, and then he came out and started a counter-extremist think tank, and it's really the first such think tank in the world, where he now is trying to deprogram Islamists and jihadists. Well, Maajid is just a superstar that needs more exposure. I mean, he's like he should be running half of civilization. So there's a series of videos on YouTube. I think it's called "Merry Christmas, Mr. Islamist."
Mr. Islamist, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so it's just
it's still up on YouTube. You can watch it.
Him pitted against the people who are playing this game. Islamists and jihadists of various sorts.
Yeah.
And that Maajid is meeting them on interview shows, mostly in the UK, where they're pretending to be more benign than they are, and Maajid is, finding the question that sort of pulls back the mask on the theocrat, and it's hilarious.
And I condemned a chap on Newsnight for not condemning stoning women to death. Look, if you're an atheist, if you're Jewish, if you're Christian, if you're Muslim, if you're a horse, right, and you call for stoning women to death, I will challenge you and condemn you. I don't care what your religion is, frankly.
Why don't you ask Adnan the key question here about stoning? Why don't you ask him?
Well, I mean, we could ask about stoning.
I'll ask him about that.
Yeah, so because Adnan, I'm not sure what you're taking issue with, because you see, it sounds to me like...
My take is the Islamic take.
Ask the question.
Okay, so if in a Islamic state, with the Sharia conditions all being perfect, in principle, I condemn stoning a woman to death.
Okay.
Right? Do you, with Sharia conditions being present, in an Islamic state, condemn stoning women who are adulteresses to death?
Yes or no?
No, there is no yes or no answer. Can I ask him a question? Can I ask him a question? Can I ask him a question?
Why is there no yes?
Likewise, Maajid, can I talk to you?
Why is there no yes or no answer?
No.
Nicky, can we get an answer? Because I answered his question. Can we now get an answer?
He misrepresents.
Do not let him get away with no answer. I answered his question.
Nicky, being fair and fair between the two of us.
I want to know. Wait.
So you have to let me
Are you going to answer yes or no?
No, there's no yes or no answer to this question.
Rabbi Laura.
Okay, so
I think I come from a very reasonable place.
If your views haven't changed, then I assume, if I may, that your perspective on, say, the Quran says, "As-sariqu wa-sariqatu faqta'u aydihima." The male and female thief, cut their hands off. Would you agree with chopping off someone's hand as a punishment for theft?
No, I don't agree with chopping off someone's hand as a punishment for theft.
If an Islamic state existed, should it chop off someone's hand for theft if all the Sharia conditions are met? Please, yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? Please, answer that. Yes or no?
Look,
I'll tell you my answer. No. What's yours?
On some of my theological views, I'm clear. On other theological views, I'd like to hear what the consensus of the scholars would be. Right. And on other theological views, I'm not made up.
Okay, well, if one were to ask me about my views on stoning someone to death, whether now or in a hypothetical, ideal Islamic state, I don't believe it's morally justifiable to defer the answer and say, I'm not sure whether someone should be stoned to death or not. That's morally reprehensible.
You would condone stoning of adulterers, for example?
No, not necessarily. It's a far bigger issue, Jeremy, than this. You cannot just pick and choose bits and bobs of the Sharia. It's a very broad issue. The social strata, the circumstances have to be
so what if the Sharia conditions?
What
if the Sharia conditions for stoning were
This has nothing to do with the education. Let's look at the education.
No, but that's what's being taught in the schools. So if the Sharia conditions for stoning the adulterer were met, then is that something in principle we should condone?
It's not being taught in schools.
Extremism in this country, among Muslims and also among the far right, is a challenge. Symbiotically, they feed into each other. It's a challenge we have to confront. If we cannot sit on Newsnight and openly say that in principle we don't condone the stoning of adulterers or the chopping of the hands, if Sharia conditions are met anywhere in the world, then we've got a problem. Because I would condemn that in principle.
This is not what we were here to discuss.
You do, presumably, don't you? You do condemn the amputation of hands and the stoning to death.
If it's not according to a due process of law in any situation,
So if it's by due process, it's okay to stone people to death?
But the fact is that these things are not taught in schools.
No, Ibrahim, sorry.
I've worked in schools
is
for
it
30
okay to
years.
stone people to death by due process?
This thing is not taught in schools, and that's what we're here to discuss.
You mention it as though it has the upper moral standard or the superiority, but you don't actually look at all the byproducts of what secularism has, or human rights, if you want to talk about that, have actually brought to this modern day world. So when we talk about that, you're not looking at the fact that...
You don't support secularism?
When you're talking about that,
do you support secularism?
Let me finish. When you're talking about that, you need to address the fact that it has also perpetuated sexism, capitalism, exploitative sort of practices. It has also perpetuated sexism.
Those are
and
human ills. They're not
homophobia.
specific to secularism.
Exactly
do you
right.
support
This
secularism?
is genuine.
Do you support secularism?
Do I need to?
No, because you said it's extreme. You said I'm the other end of the extreme.
No, I'm talking about the way that you present yourself as though you are the only acceptable form.
No, I'm not saying that, but I'm asking if you're saying I'm the other extreme. I'm asking if secularism is the other extreme.
Comes with a different narrative or a different point of view.
Is secularism the other extreme? Is secularism the other
say
extreme?
that?
Because you've just said I'm the other extreme. So I'm asking you a question.
Let's move on to another point. Rebecca, you've been listening with interest here.
It's interesting that wasn't answered. I'll ask you the question one more time, Joe. Does not the notion that stoning adulteresses to death or lashing fornicators, which is in the Quran, the lashing of the fornicators, I quoted it for you in Arabic, does that not notion contribute to looking down on women?
Are you a Muslim?
Yes, I am.
How do you interpret these verses then?
Well, I'm saying that we can't implement them, we have to suspend them, we have nothing to do with those attitudes in this day and age. That is an out-of-date notion. What do you say?
So what does lashing a woman...
Joe, can you answer my question? For God's sake, answer the question, man. What? Okay, listen. Well, in an ideal Islamic state, when all the Sharia conditions are met, and it's all, Sharia appliant and compliant, is it still wrong to stone an adulterous woman to death?
I think, obviously, if that's not part of the law of the land, then that's not the way I would go about it.
But no, I'm saying in a Sharia state where it is the law of the land and all the Sharia conditions are compliant, would you morally object to stoning an adulteress to death who's been found guilty in a Sharia court?
I'm not in a position to answer that. I'm not a scholar to answer that.
There we are. You need a scholar to tell you that it's wrong to stone a woman to death?
About, sexualizing a child or anything like that. It's actually just being proud of being Muslim, because when I wear the hijab, I feel unique. I feel like I'm showing the whole world that I'm a Muslim person, and I feel proud of that. It's not just... The hijab is more complicated than just it being a cloth. It's about you as a person, the way that you behave, the way that you act. It's a lot more complicated than just it being a cloth, basically.
So why doesn't a man wear a hijab to be proud to be Muslim?
Because it's a bit different for men. There's different standards, there's different sets for men as well for women.
Yeah, why? Well, I'm asking why though, Fatima. Why? If a Muslim man, if your husband put on a hijab and the jilbab and even a niqab, say the face veil, and said, "I want to be proud to be a Muslim," why is that wrong?
Because the hijab, the physical hijab cloth, is meant to be for women.
Yeah, why?
Standards. What do you mean why? That's just the way that it always has been. It's the way that religion is.
No, the religion tells us why, doesn't it, Fatima? Which is what you're saying it's not. And the fact that men don't wear it explains that it is. The religion tells us it's because women are expected to be modest. That's what the hadiths say.
It's not your choice at the end of the day.
Well, there we are. There's the problem. What you've just said, that precise sentence, it's not your choice. Is that if we're teaching children as young as 7 that it's not their choice, God said so. And, by the way, Fatima, what happens if you disobey God?
Well, yeah, there is hell.
Right. And do you believe in a physical burn in hell?
Yes, I do.
Fire?
Yes.
Right. And so combine those two things together you just said to me. It's not your choice, it's God's choice. And if God chooses to punish you, there's going to be a physical burning in hellfire. I think teaching a child that kind of idea is psychological abuse. Is it barbaric to stone a married woman to death for adultery?
I don't think it's barbaric. Why would I? The same way that you agree on certain rules that we follow in this country, let's say the gay rules and everything, I agree with them because I live here.
Okay, all right.
It doesn't make them acceptable to me, but I have to agree with them because I live under this country.
So you have no moral compass? Anybody who comes on this radio show and thinks it's okay to stone women to death, married or not married, I can't even believe you got hung up on that finicky detail. Married or not married. If you think it's okay to stone a woman to death, you are an embarrassment to civilization.
Unfortunately, I think that Maajid himself falls into the trap of actually perpetuating what is basically a binary. So he has gone from one extremist to the other end, basically.
Advocating liberal human rights, secular democratic values as I do, is not the other extreme to Islamist extremism. The other extreme is anti-Muslim bigotry. There are a whole bunch of far-right fascists out there who are winning elections in Europe at the moment. And we've got to stand up to both Islamist extremism and far-right fascism by consistently advocating liberal human rights values.
For you, you definitely only believe in one way of a government, only believe in secularism, or only believe that there should be, definitely there's no room for theocracy. That is what you said, no room for Islamism. That is correct. So what I'm trying to say is that there doesn't need to be that limitation.
Surely you agree theocracy is wrong. Surely.
Do I need to? Do I need to agree?
You identify yourself as gay. Why do you then choose, because it is a choice, why do you then choose to be a Muslim when it says explicitly within Islam, within Judeo-Christian tradition, that that is prohibited?
First of all, he was born the way he is, and I'm sure he can speak for himself. What I would like to say to you is, many Muslims would consider you sinful for not covering your face. The danger with literalism is in insisting that there is only one interpretation and one way of doing things. Only 200 years ago, slavery was accepted and justified by religion. Let me finish. The Quran explicitly and literally, let me finish and make this point. The Quran literally allows for slavery, as does the Bible, but we no longer practice it because our attitudes and interpretations have changed. There is no one Muslim community, there is no one way of interpreting things. If he wants to identify as being Muslim, as this gentleman here said, Abdullah, he said he's not going to tell him he's not a Muslim, and I applauded him for that. He said he's not going to discriminate against him. You just did. And so even he disagrees with you. Yes, you did. This brings me to the term Islamophobia, which is one of the biggest misnomers ever to have come about in recent years. Islamophobia includes within it hatred of Muslims as a people and criticizing and scrutinizing Islam as a religion, which is the right of every free-thinking human being anywhere in the world. So if I turned around and said that Islam today has a disproportionate problem with homophobia, with anti-freedom of religion stances, and so on and so forth, whatever, chopping the hand of the thief, that's not Islamophobic. That's talking about the doctrine of a religion that needs reform. Like we've been talking about Christianity over the course of this hour and the doctrine of confession. That's not Islamophobic, and therefore let's change the word. Let's stop using the word Islamophobia, which lends itself to accusations of blasphemy, when in fact everyone should have the right to blaspheme.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm a long way going down the road. If you were running, I don't know, a French satirical magazine, would you knowingly put on the cover a cartoon of Muhammad, knowing how it upsets Muslims?
So again, during that time, and actually 2 years before the Charlie Hebdo attacks, I posted a picture of the Prophet Muhammad on Twitter and said I'm not offended and that Muslims should grow up and grow a spine. And then the Charlie Hebdo attacks happened, and I was very vocal about defending the magazine and still remain vocal about it.
So it is all right to deliberately... I'm just asking, I'm not saying you're wrong, but it is all right to deliberately cause offence?
Yes. Because you've got every right to take offence, right? But at the end of the day, you've got no right to insist that I don't offend you. Let's not get stuck in the kind of what's a good Muslim, what's a bad Islam, what's good Islam debate. I don't care how many times somebody prays at home and what they cover their head with and how long their beard grows and how high their ankle trousers are up to their shins or whatever. I don't care about any of that, as long as they don't try and impose that on anyone else. So that's why I'm an honorary associate of the National Secular Society. The solution to all of this is to reassert small L liberal, human rights, pluralistic, democratic values and grow a spine.
All right, one quick final point from Douglas.
I just wanted to detain you for 30 seconds longer, if I may, just to mention that famously, Anna Akhmatova was visited in Moscow in the worst days by Isaiah Berlin, and she had a conversation that was free about ideas, and she said to a friend afterwards, it was like meeting a visitor from the future. What you've just heard is the future. That is the answer. And there are very few people who are willing to say it, and I think that deserves an enormous amount of tribute.
If white liberals are happy challenging the Bible Belt, then let people like me challenge our own Quran Belt, because you just heard precisely what we're up against.
I gotta say, you are the only guy I've ever heard of doing this. Why isn't the government giving you a grant to do this?
Well, I'm not sure
And a medal.
That's a clear sentence. Can you accept my statement and repeat it after me? The Taliban were an evil terrorist organization. I'm not going to repeat that. So, what do you think of that third stage where it says, فَضْرِبُوهُنَّ, beat them? What do you think of that? It's in the Quran. It's wrong, isn't it? If his teacher is unable to condemn stoning in principle or chopping off the hand in principle, I worry for the future of my son. Please set an example as an educationist and come out and say that you stand for human rights and values, liberal values. A quarter of British Muslims, when asked about the massacre at the Charlie Hebdo offices, said that those attacks are justifiable. They sympathise with the attackers as opposed to the victims.
Remember, if you constantly attack the religion...
Abdul, just answer my question. Abdul, listen, don't give me those rubbish warnings. Frankly, it doesn't scare me. Answer the question. You said you're not prepared to compromise anything in Scripture, and the Scripture clearly says, two husbands, if your wives don't obey you, beat them. If that's not a cultural attitude towards women, what is? And lo and behold, Abdul puts the phone down, which happens every single time when I pose questions like that.
And you know, Islam has nothing to do with violence. I mean, how can somebody say that Islam has anything to do with violence?
It has something to do with it, doesn't it, Muhammad? So when the Prophet Muhammad said, "Umirtu an uqatil an-nas hatta yashhadu an la ilaha illallah," which means in English, I have been ordered to fight the people until they declare there is no God but God and Muhammad is his messenger. That's clearly got something to do with violence, hasn't it?
He stands for secularism. He stands for human rights. He stands for free speech, equality, all the good stuff.
But you're not going to convince me that there is not a problem with Scripture when it comes to women. It concerns all of us. You don't have to be black to challenge racism. You don't have to be gay to challenge homophobia. You don't have to be Jewish to challenge anti-Semitism. But before you carry on blabbing your mouth, let me remind you something. I have a mother, I have a sister, born and raised from a Pakistani background in a Muslim community. Is it not possible I could be wanting to have this conversation within our communities because it affects my mother, it affects my sister? My name is Maajid Nawaz. I'm here to speak to you about the global jihadist insurgency.